As a reward for that, as a reward for taking on more risk, the government gives you a triple tax advantaged account where you can invest and use that money for health-related expenses. If you don't use it on health-related expenses, then you can convert it to a retirement account later in life.
That's called a loophole,
It's
ladies
a loophole.
and gentlemen.
Right.
That's called a loophole. So you can use it for this. And they're doing more of this, right? Like,
yes.
we've spoken about this with funds where people are creating these accounts or funding these accounts for a specific purpose. But then someone always asks a question, well, what if the kid doesn't go to, well, just convert it to something else. And
absolutely,
you can still have it. It's still your money. But welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten. And today we're talking about whether buy and hold is still the best investment advice for today's investor. But first, I want to shout out Jamaica. The whole island, the people, the food, the waves, the weather. We took a little vacation last week. Sorry we didn't drop an episode, but your girl needed a break. So did your boy.
Yeah, It was cool. It was cool. This was obviously not our first time. It was our son's, fourth time?
Yeah.
That he's been. We've been, I guess you've been about as many times. You've never been without me, to my knowledge.
I went for
Unless
work.
you feel like, oh yeah, you went for work one time. Okay.
Several times.
A couple times. Okay, well, there you go. This was not my first rodeo. I've lost count. I used to spend my summers there as a kid. But yeah, shout out to the island, man. This was a really great experience. I'm glad that we got to do our thing as a family. We've done it with my mom, and then we've done it with my broader side of my family. This was just us three, the trio, doing our thing. And it was fun to kind of experience it together.
Yeah. All right. So today's topic. I'm on this revisiting fundamentals wave. We talked about this after the election, where you can't forget about the fundamentals. It's a good time to go back and revisit them. And buy and hold is one of the cornerstones of investing advice. It's one of those things that you hear and it just, I don't know, it burns into people's brains, because if you sell, whether it's withdrawing from a 401k or just opting out of a stock, some people just freak out. You're not supposed to ever sell.
Yeah. And, there are a couple of things going on there. It is the American way. And by that, I mean, we have a great appreciation for really simple, easy to remember, set it and forget it, one button, one simple, kind of advice. And so buy and hold, this mantra, if you will, is very easy for people to kind of understand. The problem is when you oversimplify things and then life gets in the way, it forces you to break this rule that you created for yourself, which is very absolute, right? Buy and hold. It doesn't say buy and hold and anything. It just says buy and hold. And so when you have to do something beyond that, this blanket advice just doesn't quite work anymore. And I think that's really what we're revisiting. I think in one, it's challenging people to think a little bit more deeply about that advice, but two, recognizing that things have changed, and again, things are continuing to change. This is one of the reasons why we continue to talk about these topics or revisit these topics, because the context in which a lot of this advice is distributed may or may not be relevant. And so we want to make sure that we're talking about those things and also just clarifying anything, because, as things change, especially these days, you end up with a ton of misinformation.
Yeah.
And so between that and just life, like you say, life and getting in the way and people needing money now. What's that commercial? I need cash now.
Oh, JD. I think it's JD Wentworth.
JD Wentworth.
We don't watch TV no more.
877 cash now. That's the power of a jingle right there.
Wow.
That's what I mean.
I think even Bo knows that one.
He knows Liberty
several.
Mutual.
He does.
All right.
Yeah, I think, to be clear, before we go into the rest of the episode, I do think buy and hold advice is still foundational. But what's happening right now is just ignoring the financial, emotional, psychological pressures of a modern investor, right?
And the economical pressures.
Exactly.
The realities of a high inflation, really tough job market.
Absolutely.
Buy and hold is hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
In a world where you got to put food on the table and you're not really sure where the next paycheck is coming in. So
yes. I actually read this article about old money real estate tycoons. We're not talking about like your grandma who's had a home since the 1940s. I'm talking about old money, big name real estate tycoons who own like commercial buildings in New York. And the article was about how these families who have built their legacy and their wealth based on buy and hold are starting to sell their commercial properties.
Yeah.
They're breaking a quote unquote golden rule because commercial properties are hard to rent now that everybody's working from home and offices are downsizing. It's just very hard to keep them profitable. And so they're finally starting to sell. And I think that's true when you talk about even retail investors. I think a lot of people know that they're supposed to stay the course, but fear, uncertainty, a job loss, a major repair, anything that's expensive can lead people to question like whether or not that's still the goal of their investing and whether or not they should still do it. Even according to data from the New York Stock Exchange, it says that people are holding stocks for way less time. In the 1950s and 60s, investors held stocks for approximately 6 to 8 years, which doesn't seem long. We always do math based on like 30 years and 40 years, right?
Yeah.
But in the 1950s and 60s, they were only holding it for 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
Now in the 2020s, the average holding period is just 5.5 months.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's okay.
Yeah.
I understand that. I don't want to read too much into it, but yeah, I would imagine, especially in a world where you have a ton of new retail investors, that's
exactly
going to skew the data a little bit.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of reasons for it. I think technology, the platforms, the apps, which have made buying and selling much easier and more instantaneous is part of the reason. But there's also just been a ton of market fluctuations. And when you combine that with tech, where it literally sends you a push notification if a stock has dropped or if it's growing, you see all this short-term movement and it creates more of this FOMO, which creates more frequent trading. And then it just becomes this expensive cycle where you're not holding on to a stock very long enough to like start compounding. You're holding on to enough to like squeeze some profits out. But by the time you take out taxes and transaction fees, like, it's not the same as letting it compound.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you've said a couple of things that I will respond to, but I do think that there's also just merit in the realities of the world that we're in right now, which is that I think a lot of people, and we've certainly had quite a few personal conversations with people who are struggling. I mean, I've had more, hey man, you got, 10 minutes, 15 minutes for me kind of conversations, which I kind of view as these subtle economic indicators in the same way that you might look at the state of a neighborhood or a community, or the way people talk about, you have to look at the percentage of cars that might be abandoned on the side of the road, or roofs that need repair. All of these things are subtle economic indicators of the financial stress that a lot of people are experiencing right now. And it's for all of the reasons that we've mentioned in previous podcasts, from just the general cost of living being incredibly higher than it is, the difficulty to stop like the compulsive spending. We talk about that in terms of behaviors and habits, but also the sophistication of marketers these days, but just also just the realities of the job market, where people are working hard, they're getting their paycheck, maybe they've been downsized, maybe they've been laid off, and it's just very, very difficult to jump back in. Obviously, there's some people who are better skilled and adept at making those kinds of moves, but I think a lot of people are feeling that stress, and it's forcing them to reckon with this old advice that they understand, but are struggling to bring to life or make useful in today's market. In addition to that, I do think that there's something deeper, more cultural going on. And I think this is specific to men. And that is to say, this is just where men are at this point. I felt a little validated because The Atlantic published an article the other day, and it's unfortunately behind a paywall, but the gist of it was, or the title was, The Three Pillars of the Bro Economy. And they were saying day trading, sports betting, and crypto are about to get bigger. That was the subtitle of the article. And they're basically saying, this is where men are right now. This is what, in a lot of ways, is describing kind of bros and this idea of like manliness with respect to money, and kind of like the way that those two things coincide. This is what they're talking about. This is what they're thinking about. And it's so real. We've spoken about this. We did an episode on Money on the Table season 3 about the rise of sports betting and just how subtle that bum rush of sports betting has been over the last couple of years, but that is contributing to it. Obviously, if you spend more than 5 minutes on social media over the last 5 years, you've seen this incredible influx of interest with respect to options and day trading. And so people are basically, if you can imagine like a bro being on their phone, it's like they're betting on their apps, they are monitoring or conducting transactions with their options. And then they're posting about it on social media.
Don't
and
forget
then
crypto.
Right. So crypto too, right? Because especially right now, which is very hard to argue with a crypto bro when you've got Bitcoin doing what it's doing. And again, we've never been anti-crypto. It's just a matter of putting it in its place with respect to other less volatile asset classes out there. But all of that to say, you've got all of these converging issues and forces that are at play that I think are contributing to why the idea of buy and hold comes across as like outdated or inflexible. And it isn't. It's just a generalized mantra. You know what I mean? But that's not to diminish the merit of the strategy of buying and holding for the long term or preserving, saving, and investing for the long term. So we're trying to peel back those layers a little bit. There are a couple of reasons that I think we'll get into in just a couple seconds. Yeah, this is just where we are right now, I think.
Yeah, I think if you've convinced yourself that one of those three options, pun intended, is your path entirely, and you're not just doing it because it's fun, or you're not just doing it because you've, been able to squeeze out a couple $1,000s. If you're convinced that that's your path, it's either because you're incredibly smart or lucky, or you already had a bunch of cash. And so every successful trade or coin that you purchase is incredibly lucrative for you because you had a big pile to start with, or you're just in desperate times and these are your desperate measures, right? Yeah. I ain't gonna hold you. If you're convinced that one of those three paths is the most sure and stable path, I'd also like to introduce you to lottery tickets, casinos, and all the other things that bet on inefficient odds to make money. It's always existed. I ain't gonna hold you. Like, this is America. You're allowed to do what you want with your money. But for everybody else, and for people who just dabble in those things for fun or do them because they're interesting and they're fun to talk about, we're here to offer you some alternatives and some nuance to buy and hold to solve any issues that you may be having. And issues is probably the wrong word. It's like tension. If you're feeling like you're missing out on something, or you at least want to think about it differently, we're going to give you a couple ways to do that.
Yeah.
And I think the first is just addressing the meaning of hold. A lot of people equate hold with inaction, and it can feel passive and unhelpful when you see all of this volatility other places, or you see the headlines that Bitcoin is almost at 100,000 or Doja bounced back or whatever it was. I was like that too. Hold felt outdated. It felt restrictive. It felt boring. But it's important to know that holding isn't ignoring the market, but it is deliberately choosing not to act based on the noise.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not that you're not doing anything. There's always something to do.
Yeah.
And I've learned that if you can't figure out the thing to do, then it's likely the limits of your literacy, which means you probably need to go into the next level of financial literacy, the 201 course, or it's a challenge of imagination. Maybe money is not the thing that you need to be playing with to begin with. Because there's a whole list of actions that you can take that are engaged and proactive, but don't abandon a strategy that has been proven to work.
Yeah. I don't want to over rely on anecdotal data, but like most of the rich people that we know got there through buying and holding. A very tiny percentage got there because they are building on, let's say, an inheritance or something that was passed down to them. But the vast majority of them got there through business ownership. And so we're not going to get into the conversation about, whether or not you should be an entrepreneur. We've already spoken about those kinds of things. That's besides the point. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. Like, it still works. It has historically always worked. And that's where the entire idea of buying hold as the number one kind of approach that you should be placing at the center of your wealth building strategy comes from. Like, it's there for a reason. I will also say, if you are just so compelled, like you've got this itch that you just have to scratch, there are things that you can do. And I think we're going to talk about diversification at some point, maybe after this quick little point here, but there are other things that you can do if you feel like ignoring the news or ignoring these opportunities is just seeming a little bit too hard for you to do, and you're excited because you're looking at other people that feel like they are pacing ahead of you or something like that. First of all, it's not a competition. We've said that before, but I understand that feeling. It's really tough to look at other people posting returns from Nvidia or, Tesla or Amazon or some other hot tech stock, and you feel like, oh my gosh, had I just moved something or made a different decision or not been so traditional, I would have had a very different outcome. But I think that one of the things that is so frequently overlooked, and I'm hoping this changes over time, is just the use of robo-advisors. And I'm saying that with tremendous pride, because when I first started to think about inserting my voice into the personal finance world, robo-advisors was one of the things that I was particularly excited about. And back then it seemed like a really novel idea. I predicted that it would become as commonplace as Google would be over time. And that's exactly what happened. I'm not saying I'm some kind of genius, but I'm just like paying attention. No, I'm just paying attention to what happens in the tech space, where things seem, wild and unusual and wildly expensive at first, but then it just becomes the norm over time.
Well, it makes sense.
That is the story of technology. And so not only is it faster and more reliable, but it's also much more affordable compared to the alternative. And what big firms have done is they realize that we actually have to compete in that space. And so many of these other companies are offering up their own versions of robo-advisors. But this is one of the great ways I think that people can do that. If you just want to get excited and get involved with something that's new and exciting, I think whether it's a Betterment account or a Wealthfront account, if you're a super beginner, getting an Acorns account. We've done podcasts about this before. Those are great ways that you can have something else that you can monitor on a day-to-day basis that gives you some kind of, skin in the game that you can react to, versus money that may be sitting in a tax-deferred account that you're looking at. Maybe you're only getting or looking at a monthly statement, but you're not really able to react to anything, right? So you can't really scratch that itch. But I think using a robo-advisor is just one of the best emotionless and efficient ways to nurture or, get a feel for that kind of impulse investing feel that a lot of people are looking to accomplish.
Yeah, they give you the satisfaction of activity, but you don't have all that emotional interference that you bring.
It makes
to
you
the
feel
table.
like you're doing something.
Yeah, because you
what
are.
I'm saying? Yeah, and you are.
Robo-advisors allow you to do something without doing the wrong thing.
Correct.
Because they will automatically rebalance your portfolio, which is something you should be doing or looking at a couple times a year.
Tax loss harvesting.
They will optimize for tax inefficiency. They adjust to market conditions while still holding your risk tolerance in mind. And that level of efficiency and unemotional activity at a speed that actually matters in the market is something that humans can't replicate, right? Like, it's not about acknowledging that the robots are smarter than you. You're telling the robots your strategy, but they are more disciplined and more consistent because they don't have to sleep. It's a robot. It's a bot.
Like, they've seen it before. Whatever you've seen, whatever little indicator you have created or that you are receiving, they've seen that 100,000 times before. They can quantify and analyze that data and make a quick decision based on the direction that you offer it. And so you have a much better chance of accomplishing your intended goal that way. I will say this: if you just got a fiddle and you still want to find a hybrid, Betterment may not actually be your best option. Betterment, the last time I checked, is much more for people who just want to make the financial contribution and buy into a predetermined robo-advisory portfolio. Whereas Wealthfront allows you to say, well, you can do that, but you can also add or customize and make some decisions on your own based on gut feeling or based on your risk tolerance. There are some obstacles, if I'm not mistaken, or higher minimum requirement balances that you have to have in order to invest in Wealthfront. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case and has been the case for a number of years. And so, yeah, just something to think about. If you're that person that feels like, man, how do I make sense of all these things? I want to have a little bit of crypto. I want to do, some individual stocks. And, I feel like I'm ready to graduate. One, congratulations. That means that there's a baseline level of confidence and understanding that you have with your portfolio. But don't ruin it based on what you're seeing on the news or based on the political environment or any of those things, because that does not work out well for the long run.
Yeah. Like we said, get into these advanced level investment topics, whether it's tax loss harvesting, I can't even say it, tax loss harvesting, backdoor Roths, whatever floats your boat, direct indexing. We've done podcasts on almost all of those subjects, but at the end of the day, there's other things that you can be doing. So you don't have to abandon your strategy just because you're a little bored. I think another reason people question the merits of buy and hold as the better strategy is because they don't have enough diversification in their investments. Maybe they're too concentrated in one position. Maybe they have heavy investments in health, which did really well in the early 2000s and during the pandemic, but has since kind of flattened out. Or maybe you're too conservative in bonds because you made a switch after 2020 and never switched it back to get all of the returns from the bounce back.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're just lacking some income generating assets, like you mentioned, like a business or like a dividend producing stock or real estate, some sort of side hustle. But it's usually because you're asking the investments that you have to do so many different things, and you haven't created a strategy that allows them to do it.
So I would expand on that a little bit and say, with respect to diversification, I think one of the other reasons why people start to question buy and hold is because a significant portion of their wealth is actually tied up in housing. And they were likely one of those people who bought a house because a house is one of the best investments that you'll ever make. 5 years, 10 years go by, and they're not seeing the kind of appreciation in their home that they would have hoped. And they're basically house rich and cash poor. And so they are in some ways regretting or wishing that they had invested more, because they can see. You can very clearly see what the value of your stock portfolio may be, and you wished that your housing or the value of your primary home would have appreciated to the same proportion. And I think that's part of the reason why people shit basically on the idea of buy and hold, because they're applying the experience that they've had through housing to their investment portfolio. The second reason for that, in most cases, I believe, is really in response to people not seeing a kind of appreciation or the magical compounding effect in their retirement accounts. And that is in most cases because you don't know what you're invested in. You are likely invested in some hodgepodge of mutual funds that were recommended to you by your financial advisor. You don't understand what it is. There's likely all kinds of overlap or just unnecessary complication, which basically translates to more fees going into the pocket of the brokerage company. And that's why you're just not really a believer, because you have applied the idea of buying and holding to your retirement portfolio, but you don't really understand what's in it. And so when you hear all this talk about it, it doesn't match up with what you're seeing on your portfolio. And so I would say, if that is you, if that sounds like you, one, revisit whether or not you just have too much house. And two, if this latter sounds like you need to take a greater level of control, which starts with financial education. We offer a course called Making Money Grow, which basically teaches you the fundamentals of investing in 5 hours. I think it's a great place to start. If that doesn't work for you, find some other source. But once you learn that information and you start making choices based on that new evidence that you have in front of you, it fundamentally changes the way that you view investing. The last thing that I will say, there's a bit of an indicator why you might be willing to throw away or feel like buy and hold is not really your thing, is because when you look at your wealth as a whole, most people have that wealth tied up in their home. Then the second sort of largest portion of their portfolio might be in their retirement account, which they know that they can't touch. They don't have anything that they can really look at, like something in the oven or that they can put their hands on, and it's very similar to the same effect that we were talking about with robo-advisors. But this is where your 401k or your traditional IRA or even your Roth may not necessarily be the kind of thing that you really need. Like, this is where a brokerage account comes in. Like, you just want to feel like you're growing something, as opposed to something is happening in the background and you're not really able to touch it or influence it in any way. And so I would say, whether it's a robo-advisor, which is a brokerage account, by the way, you can also open a taxable brokerage account. We've done episodes on that before. We've received and still receive compliments and notes from that episode, because I think it just forced a lot of people to say, oh, I didn't realize that that's what that is, or that's how that could be used, or this is a purpose that could be done. But, if you're talking about something that you may have a need for within the next 5 to 10 years, that money should not be in a tax deferred account. It should be in a taxable account, like a brokerage account, so that you can make more aggressive, more strategic investment decisions, and then, no pun intended, cash out or sell those investments. That's still buy and hold. That's still technically considered a long-term investment.
Correct.
Right? It's just not a retirement account. It's not something that's going to be going for 3 decades or 4 decades, right? But that's still technically, maybe it's midterm, but I guess this is where people get confused. And
it is.
Going back to our point, this is where financial education comes in, because they hear one thing, They apply it to everything that they understand to be true. And then the rubber meets the road and feels like, well, that doesn't work. And they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, the bathwater.
What'd I say?
Bathwater.
With the
I don't know what
bathwater.
you said.
I was running out of breath.
I think that's such an important point because buy and hold is not one size fits all. It's going to be different depending on the account and that account's purpose. To your point, if it's a retirement account that you're holding for decades, volatility doesn't matter as much. Touching it doesn't matter as much because it's like a strategy that's supposed to hold you over in your old age when you're no longer generating an income.
Yeah.
And a brokerage account, you might hold for 5 to 10 years and you're mixing in assets that you're willing to sell sooner. And then in specialized accounts like a 529 or an HSA, you might hold for short-term predictable healthcare expenses, but then it's, still growing a portion long-term. The strategy changes.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example in our HSA, which is an investment account that is specific to health expenses. So I'm going to open up the trunk. No, it's the hood. What is it? This is what happens
when you get a Tesla.
Yeah.
What is a trunk?
What is a trunk? What is a frunk? What is an engine?
I got both. Which one are you talking about?
So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into one of our accounts, which is an HSA. It's a health savings account, which is an investment account specific for health expenses. Now, in order to get one, you have to be enrolled in a high deductible healthcare plan, which isn't available at every workplace or even recommended for every family, right? It's one of those things that you have to look at your risk tolerance, your past health, and make a bet and decide that I can afford a higher deductible for the year. Therefore, I'm going to enroll in this type of insurance plan. As a reward for that, as a reward for taking on more risk, the government gives you a triple tax advantaged account where you can invest and use that money for health-related expenses. If you don't use it on health-related expenses, then you can convert it to a retirement account later in life.
That's called a loophole,
it's
ladies
a loophole.
And gentlemen.
Right.
That's called a loophole. So you can use it for this. And they're doing more of this, right?
Yes.
We've spoken about this with finance where people are creating these accounts or funding these accounts for a specific purpose. But then someone always asks a question, well, what if the kid doesn't go to, well, just convert it to something else and
absolutely
you can still have it. It's still your money, but this is the incentive to invest and to continue to invest and to remove the obstacles that stop people from actually making better long-term decisions. They want you to fund your own lifestyle and your own care because this is their version. You got to rethink. The last thing I'll say, I know I interrupted you, but just you got to rethink what an incentive is. Yes. An incentive is not a present. It's not a gift. It's not a prize or a reward. It is the government putting their hands up and saying, look, it's on you. It's on you. That's what an incentive is. That's what these things are. It's saying, look, you should do this because you're going to need it. And we don't know if we'll be able to cover any of these things. And so this is our way of saying, I think you should do this instead of the alternative. And you have to rethink how you make sense of these kinds of opportunities. It's not a reward. It's a warning.
Absolutely. And because of that, I manage this account totally different than I manage our retirement accounts. Mm-hmm. The fundamentals are still there because we don't use it today for our health expenses. I welcome more risk in this account. And so it's mostly in high growth funds because healthcare expenses on an annual basis increase in the double digits. And so I need the account to keep pace with what I anticipate our future healthcare expenses are. And so 80% is concentrated in an ETF called QQQ. If you haven't heard of QQQ, it's basically the top 100 stocks in the NASDAQ, excluding all of the financial stocks.
Maybe you've seen the commercial for it.
Yeah.
Lots of commercials.
They are all over NCAA.
Yeah. Which doesn't make me feel that good because I know I paid for it. But it's okay.
Yeah. So it's basically the top 100 non-financial stocks, which means it checks the boxes. It's diversified because our retirement and brokerage accounts are based on the S&P 500, which includes companies that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, CBOE, and this is just the NASDAQ, and it excludes financial. It's also more volatile than our other accounts because it's only 100 companies instead of 500 companies like the S&P is. And it's more tech heavy because the NASDAQ is more tech heavy. And so the other 20% of our account is split among traditional index funds. I've got a few shares of NVIDIA that I picked up during the stock split earlier this year. I've got some Coinbase in there. It's less than, 5% of the total, but I've got a little bit of everything in the last 20%. Now, year to date, that account is up almost 30%. It was 27% last week. I don't know. I don't really look at it in terms of beating the market. I'm only looking at it to see if it kept pace with our healthcare spending or our anticipated future healthcare spending.
Yeah.
Even though we're not drawing down to pay for our healthcare, it's important that when we need to, the amount of money that we need is there. And I think that's the key of having multiple investment accounts. If you only have one type of investment account today, I think it's time to ask yourself, is your money set up to support your life and your goals or just your retirement? That's a really important question before you take on a very risky crypto, day trading, sports betting, whatever hustle you're trying to do to fill whatever hole you think is there. Ask yourself if your traditional investments are actually set up to support your life, because I think that'll lead you to a different answer or a different path.
I like that. That sounds like a great TED Talk. You should start writing it immediately tomorrow. You talked about trading. I want to round this out a little bit and talk about that. And I'm not going to get into the details. We're pretty clear on our point of view on trading. But I will say this, generally speaking, the way that I think about investing, and I'm saying that I'm sharing this for the people who got caught up in the last couple of years. Like, the reality is, and I'll say this pretty confidently, I don't know very many people who are successful options and trading investors.
Less than 5.
And
I know thousands of people.
Yeah, I know the vast majority of people that I know, sure, have a couple of success stories, a couple dopamine hits that they've been chasing for a really, really long time. But once you look at it, what they call net, right? Like, once you look at the time that they've spent trying to analyze and predict the market's moves, when you look at the amount of losses piled up, right, compared to the few or handful of wins that they may have had over the last couple of years. And certainly when you look at, which a lot of people don't talk about, the transaction fees and the actual costs of conducting all of these markets, like, it's not free. Like, the first one may be free, or it may be free and they're telling you it's free, but we've spoken about this, about how tricky, especially Robinhood, is at getting there. So it's not free. Why in the world would they create an app that allows you to make money for free? It's not free. It's hidden. It is taken out on the top, but that you don't see what's happening, but it's not free. Okay. So that's first off. But the second thing is, and I'll use a bit of a metaphor here because it's top of mind. If you've ever flown into Atlanta and, especially if you're coming from international, you got about a 10-minute walk, depending on how fast you walk. There's a long walk from when you get off that flight until you get to customs, and you're going through, what do they call those things? Speed walks, moving sidewalks. You've got, a couple stairs, you got elevators, you got some escalators. I mean, you are going a long, long way. And it's always, at least for me, feels like a little bit of a competition, right? So you've got some people who are just like riding it out because they know they've done this before. It's going to be 10 to 12 minutes. And they tell you, like, you're at this point, 3 to 5 more minutes, 6 more minutes from where you are right now. But there's always the people that are on the side that get to speed walking or thinking that they're going to get ahead because they don't want to, end up at the back of the line. Those are the options traders to me. The over efforting,
taking the stairs on the escalators right there.
Exactly. The people who believe that they just don't have the time or the patience to take on those slow escalator. I feel like I can get to the top I could skip a couple steps. And what happens is, at first, yeah, they're right. They beat you. They're like, oh, wow, they reached that first little landing,
They get to speed walking.
They get to speed walking there, and then they get to the second one, and it's like, all right, I can't keep up this pace. And then by the time you get there, they end up the same spot where you were. Like, I relish that feeling. I really do. I really do. It's the same thing in traffic. I don't spend as much time in traffic these days, but it's the same thing in traffic. The people who are speeding and they're going in and out the lanes.
Only to be stopped at a red light.
And then you get to the red light and you're right next to them. And it's like, you did all that.
All that risk.
All that risk. You don't risk your insurance going up. You don't risk hurting somebody, yourself. You don't, risk getting a ticket just to end up right next to me when you should have just went to speed limit and just mind your business, right? That right exists as in America, right? You have that right to go in and out, to buy and hold your positions as much as you can. You can speed walk when you have that right. But the data suggests that the vast majority of people either end up tired, they don't sprain an ankle, trying to sprint up these stairs with luggage, or they don't wreck their cars and now they, hoping to get a good rental, as soon as their car get out the shop, and now they got to spend thousands of dollars, right? That's just the reality of it. And so it may seem slow. It may seem like the tortoise versus the hare kind of argument. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but like, chill out. You're still moving. You're still moving when you take the escalator. You do not need to sprint up the stairs and risk breaking a bone or hurting somebody just to get to the same space, or in some cases, falling behind in the process because you skipped a step or missed one.
Yeah, I love that. I think it is. You're right. When you think about compounding versus frequent trading, which is the difference between exponential growth and linear growth, it is very hard for a human brain to understand what that means mathematically. Mm-hmm. But the escalator and the stairs analogy works perfectly, because when you get on an escalator, you step on and it continues to move upward, automatically just building on that initial effort. If you make the effort to step on it, it's going to take you up. Mm-hmm. When you are climbing the stairs, yes, absolutely, you may be able to go faster, but every step requires a fresh effort. You're never building on the initial effort. You have to keep efforting, and it will exhaust you. And so the reason that buy and hold still works is because the return on effort is just as important as a return on investment.
Yeah.
Like, return on effort and low effort doesn't mean avoiding all effort and never doing anything. It just means putting the effort where it counts the most, right? Yeah. Effort in the right places. Spending the time to set up automated deposits, spending the time to rebalance your portfolio, spending the time to learn new strategies. Those are all high effort, high return activities. And then just avoiding unnecessary complexity. Like, it don't have to be hard. There may be seasons where you want it to be hard. Maybe you're trying to save for a new roof or some other expense in your home, HVAC system, whatever it is. And you may create a brokerage account that is specific for a 5-year plan that includes buying and holding, selling, trading, a mix of assets that you expect to grow but plan to sell once you get closer to your goal.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. But to do that as a general strategy for life and for income just feels unnecessarily complicated and risky, which is why buy and hold still has to be somewhere in your baseline.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about this is, because we're all human beings and prone to compare our lives and successes to other people, one of the things that I think a lot of people fail to pay attention to is even how someone's successful. Like, let's say, someone who got it out the mud, and 10 years after they've early retired or they've exited their company or something like that, they start talking about the amount of money that they've made with a single individual stock investment and how it has leaped something else, or, some interesting play that they did with a crypto coin or something like that. And it makes you say, like, wow, let me just ignore steps 1 through 7 and just focus on, I just need one of those to hit, and then I'll be fine. The difference is that person could afford to lose whatever that investment was, right? So like, when they were going through steps 1 through 6, building that wealth, whether it's paying down debt and or investing in decades later, or building that company and then selling it and then cashing out of that position, whatever it is, they're at a position. And we've spoken with plenty of wealthy people. I remember we were talking with, but that's not the only billionaire we've actually spoken with. I ain't gonna say his name, but he was like, yeah, man, like, I would put all my money in crypto at this point. Why? Because he don't need no more US dollars. So he can put 100,000, 200,000 every single day. He can put it. Why not? Because it's more interesting for him to have an interesting story to tell, and he can afford to lose a couple $1,000,000. He's not going to feel it. Most people can feel that.
Yes.
You can feel $500. You know what I'm saying?
They don't feel that on any purchase. There are people who bet $300,000 on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. That doesn't mean we should all do it. There are tons of things that people spend money on because they can afford it. And just because it's loud and all over your algorithm and being shared by people like in admiration or awe or shock, that's the way the algorithm is supposed to work. Come on back down to the regular side, where we do not spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. We do not bet our livelihoods and our futures on chance.
Yes. And we don't expect anyone to feel sorry for us if we do. I hate to say that part, but like, if you want to know why people switch up, it's because they remember how you spent your money for as long as they've known you.
Yeah.
And so don't be that person, because most of you, end up being people who are in need and then frustrated by others who did make the right decisions, who did make those kinds of sacrifices, and who did work hard and manage their money responsibly, may not be in a position to help you, right? Or even be willing to help you. I know I'm getting there. I'm certainly getting there. It's part of my old age and old man kicking in. It's like, I've known people for 30 years. And I've been talking about some of the things that we should be doing with our money and thinking about wealth building for a really, really long time. And so when I see people, after 20 years needing help, I'm not, unfortunately, as generous. I'm just not. I'm far more willing to help someone that I know was really down and out versus someone who was just looking for a bailout and made repeated poor decisions over multiple decades.
Right.
And I think that in and of itself is something that is a key contributor to the tone of the political environment as a whole, is as people are just very anti giving handouts to people who they don't believe are worthy or who deserve it. And it gets messy. But all of that to say, buy and hold is still relevant. It is still effective. It is still an important part of your strategy. And if anything, we just need to expand its applicability as opposed to just looking at it in a very one-dimensional, singular purpose sort of way. It is still by far one of the best general investing approaches and advice that you could ever receive. And so if you are intrigued, if you find yourself, just a little antsy and excited because you feel like there are cool kids out there making a lot more money, a lot faster than you ever did, just remember that most of those people will eventually burn out and or lose all of their gains. You see it all the time. That's why supposedly rich people work so hard. It's because they're trying to make up for the losses. They're trying to get back to where they know they would have been had they just invested that money. And so be smart, take care of yourself, focus on your health. You want to be in a position where you got HSA money and you don't need to spend it on medical expenses. Yeah. That's the flex. Yeah. And so get there, day by day, month by month, and, look back and smile about it.
Amen. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. You know what else is still relevant, active, and a huge part of our strategy and yours? Leaving a 5-star review. I don't know. I was there and I started making a list, and the ADHD was HDing. So leave us a review if you like what you heard, or drop a comment below. Keep the conversation going, and we will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.